Okay. So that was my first ever time shouting out howdy because I haven't yet internalized in my system. So thank you so much for responding. So thank you everyone for staying. I know it's a long day, but we are about to have Dr. Valerie Hudson give us a most exciting keynote speech on her book project. And it's a great honor for me to actually stand up here and introduce Dr. Hudson. So I could actually take up your whole time and list up all the achievements she have made throughout her career, but I'm not gonna do it. I'm gonna spare some time for her. So I have a short version of her bio, but as you can see, you can read every details of her amazing achievements on the booklet you have. So Dr. Valerie Hudson is a university distinguished professor and holds a George H.W. Bush Chair in the Department of International Affairs at the Bush School of Government and Public Service here at Texas A&M University, where she directs the amazing program on women, peace, and security. She is the author or editor of multiple award-winning books, including with Andrea Den Boer, Bare Branches, The Security Implications of Asia's Surplus Male Population, published in MIT Press in 2004, which won the American Association of Publishers Award for the best book in political science. And not to mention her most recent book, The First Political Order, that was published in 2020 and was referenced by Hillary Clinton. Dr. Hudson's articles have appeared in numerous journals as International Security, American Political Science Review, Population and Development Review, and the Journal of Peace Research, as well as policy journals. And as a student back in the days, I have read them millions of times. I have cited them so much. If you haven't, please do. Dr. Hudson is also a co-founder and principal investigator of the Women's Stats Project, as you have seen just earlier in the panel, which includes the largest compilation data on the status of women in the world today. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Hudson for her keynote speech.
Oh, you can see why I'm a happy woman. I get to teach the best students in the world about the best subject in the world with the best faculty colleagues in the world. So I'm a very happy camper. Before I begin, I want to make a couple of announcements. Our photographer has asked that the speakers stay behind after the event is over for just a few minutes to get some formal photographs that we can publicize the event. You'll also notice that in the program there is going to be reflections from selected individuals. Well, those individuals were not selected beforehand, but I can give you a heads up that I will be selecting students who are not Women's Stats coders, who are in my classes, or who are attending the U.S. Air Force Academy. I'll select 2 or 3 of you to just come up and tell us what you got from today. So if that subset of the audience applies to you, just be thinking about what you would like to say. All right, I'd like to preface my remarks by feeling, like I'm about to step off a cliff. Last month, I signed a contract with Columbia University Press to write this new book, which would be an extremely different new book than anything I've written before, because it would not be empirical per se. I wouldn't be doing new statistical analyses. It would not really be interview-based, like my book, The Hillary Doctrine, where I trotted around the nation talking to everybody and their sister about Hillary Clinton. That it would actually be more of a philosophical type of book, which I've never done before. And so Since I've never done that before, I'm feeling a little, shaky on this. And I also haven't written the book yet, so you're getting my preliminary thoughts. But I have been thinking about these things for a long time. I'm an old lady now, and I've been thinking about these things ever since I was in grad school at Ohio State University with Professor Charles F. Herman, who is sitting in the audience today, who was my dissertation advisor. So Chuck, I guess I can blame you on any of the problems. All right. I'm here to talk to you today about something that I'm calling echt Realpolitik. And if you speak German, or if you Google quickly on your phone, you will find out that echt means a realer, a more full, a more genuine something, right? And what I'm talking about here is a fuller, more genuine Realpolitik. So the book will hopefully present, if you will, a feminist, a primer on feminist IR realism. Now, I want to suggest to you that probably every single one in the room who works with the national security establishment or who is a security scholar, a study scholar, we view ourselves as clear-eyed, hard-nosed realists, don't we? Because what's the alternative? To characterize ourselves as an idealist, that currently doesn't fly in the culture of security studies, right? In fact, a lot of our credibility, I think, to speak in the field derives from our ability to signal that we are these types of realists. That is, we see the world as it is and not how we want it to be. And that allows us to assure the national interest in a way that is most effective. Now, classic Realpolitik, not to be confused, those of you who are my students in the room, with neo-realism, but classic Realpolitik, a la Hans Morgenthau, has been the template for this view. And some of these principles are well known to you. It's not a comprehensive list, but when we think of Realpolitik in the classic sense, we're thinking about such things as, the proposition, the assumption that human nature is not inherently benign, and that the national interest is defined in terms of power, increasing it, maintaining it, displaying it, and that insofar as we talk about anything ethical, the paramount ethical course of action for a state is to pursue its national interest doggedly, no matter where that takes you. And lastly, that pursuit must be rational. That is, the state must tally the costs and benefits of particular actions. I don't think anyone would disagree with those things. But what I would like to suggest to you is that Realpolitik has an Achilles heel. And that Achilles heel is that it was theorized and applied almost exclusively by men deliberating with other men in terms that men would find persuasive about things that men notice and recognize. Okay? That's its Achilles heel. Now, this is not to say that men are somehow flawed, but that all human beings, in a sense, have a limited perspective on security. And one of the reasons that it is limited is due to our differences. And one of those differences is differences in sex. Now, what I'm going to assert to you is that this historical legacy renders IR realism a partial and incomplete realism. And if I'm correct about that, then an incomplete realism is by definition not realistic, and that may have many profound consequences for national security policy. So I'm just going to start with 3 stories. I think Susan is our storyteller. She's an ace storyteller. I'm not quite as good, but I'm going to give it my best shot. Do we sometimes see the Achilles heel? Does sometimes the Achilles heel sort of pop out and go, here I am? I think sometimes it does. And I've been trying to collect stories about that for some time. So let me give you one example. I have a colleague, Professor Kathy Weary, who has, I think it's a biannual Women in Intelligence conference. And at one of those conferences, I was sitting at a luncheon, much like the luncheon we had today, with Gina Barrett, who wrote a really great book. I think it's called National Security Mom, and it's just awesome. And she and I were talking about these kinds of things, and she said, the first time I realized there was a difference, she said. Now, of course, she's an intel officer, and she had been posted overseas. So she told me that when you're posted overseas as intel, right, you have to have a special course on how to be, aware of your surroundings, how to protect yourself as a matter of course, rather than having to think about it and so forth. And she was the only woman going through this particular course for this particular cohort. And, at the end of it, she was talking to one of the men who was in the course. And the question was, well, what did you learn from this course that you had never, ever thought of before? And the young man said, when you get in a car, you immediately lock the doors. Never knew that. Now, of course, you hear a number of feminine chuckles here because every single woman in this room locks the doors of her car the minute she gets in it. Every single one. And so that, for me, was a slight lifting of the curtain. Ooh, right? There's something there. Another lifting of the curtain, and some of you have heard me tell this story before, is when Hillary Matfess and I, she's now at the University of Denver, I'm so proud of her, but Hillary Matfess and I wrote an article when she was a doctoral student about the linkage between bride price and recruitment into terror and rebel groups, okay? And astonishingly, about a month or 2 after that article was published, we got an email. All right, now we published the article, I think it was in 2017, and we got an email from a State Department official who was serving in Kabul. And this person wrote, I feel like an idiot. He said, not 2 months ago, we had a village delegation come in and want to speak to State Department officials, and it seemed like an urgent matter, and then we discovered it was about wedding costs. And they were going on and on about wedding costs were getting so high, and the State Department needed to do something about it. And I didn't know what to say. We don't do wedding costs at the State Department. So I said, yeah, in America it's crazy too. The kids want doves, right? And they want Cinderella coaches, and they want all this stuff, and I commiserate with you. Wedding costs are just too high. And he said, then I read your article, and now I know what they were trying to tell me, which was because wedding costs were so high, when the springtime came, their sons were going to join the Taliban in order to gain enough money to pay the new higher bride price. I feel like an idiot. And once more, just a little peek, right, at how the perspective can be so different. And then, one that I think you are now familiar with, right, is, the global birth strike. I can tell you that, even like 6 or 7 years ago, in security studies, there were no sections of the syllabus on the global birth strike, were there? Right? And I think this has something to do, again, with the fact of how gendered that issue was, right? Giving birth is like a woman's issue, right? What would we in national security be talking about those kinds of things. But I think there are some amazing issues with the birth strike. I just want to lay some of these incredible statistics on you because they really are something else. In 2020, The Lancet, the famous British medical journal, released a comprehensive world fertility study and documented what one commentator describes as, I love this description, quote, a mysterious, earth-shattering trend of 50% decline in world fertility over 50 years with no end in sight. These results are jaw-dropping. I remember thinking, mysterious? Mysterious to whom? And once again, right, I saw that little peak, right? Who is it mysterious to? Well, it wasn't mysterious to me, I can tell you that. But this is extremely important. We not only have nations with low fertility rates, sub-replacement rates, we have nations with rates so low they have never been seen in history. And I hate to point to my colleague Suman Lee, but it's in South Korea, of course, that has never in its entire recorded history had a birth rate as low as this. We're talking about birth rates so low it will be almost impossible. No, it'll be impossible to recover from this. But there's some other things I think you need to think about. By 2100, China will have fewer people than it had in 1960. And its working age and, of course, military age population will be less than a third of what it is now. Less than a third of what it is now. And by 2050, if you don't think you'll be alive by 2100, by 2050 in China, men and women in their early 80s will outnumber children under the age of 5. It's really absolutely amazing. For France, you have to go back to the Second World War to find birth rates as low as we have now. In fact, projections are that in at least 20 countries, population will halve. They'll have half the population that they have now by the end of the century. The entire continent of Europe will have fewer people than the United States by that time. And in the US, projections are that the number of people aged 65 and older will surpass the number who are 18 and younger in just 1 decade from now. So this is huge, and the fact that it sort of just only hit the national security radar about 6 or 7 years ago is, to me, what is mysterious and jaw-dropping. So I think there is an Achilles heel, and I think some of these stories kind of lift the blanket and help us to see those. Now, please do not assume that what I am suggesting is that we have to repudiate realism. That's not what I'm here today to talk to you about at all. What I'm here to talk to you today about is rebuilding realism by rendering it complete, right, instead of partial. So I want to start building this echt realpolitik to better secure our nation. Classical realpolitik, as we say, was formed by male worldviews, male psychology, mediated by male bodily experiences. And I'm fine with that. Let's keep those. But what I would like to look at is female worldviews, female psychology, mediated by female bodily experiences. Last night at dinner, we were talking about this very subject, and I said, I'm not of the camp that believes that women are inherently pacifists, okay? The idea that somehow women sort of represent the angels of peace. I'm not an angel of peace. Is there any woman in this room that wants to volunteer that she's an angel of peace? Yeah, there isn't one, okay? So it's not some sort of women peace, men war. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is that women move through this world differently than men move through this world. And we haven't understood that or understood the implications for national security. Right? Not just operations, but also doctrine. Also our very understanding of what a threat is and what an appropriate threat response is. So we're not going to jettison anything that the men have given us, but we are going to add to it, and thereby we are going to rebuild it. All right. I even think that the quest for a fuller realpolitik might even be emancipatory. I know that the students in the Bush School hear over and over again about the security dilemma in a system of anarchy. I know that they have been taught about the tragedy of great power politics, as John Mearsheimer calls it. I know that they've been informed about the great game of geopolitics. But what I would like to suggest is that I think a fuller realism will actually create opportunities to free us from those straitjackets, where we're forced by the logic that we've been bequeathed to go in a particular strategic direction, which may not be optimal for our own national interests. I also think that classic realpolitik is blind to certain threats. One of the most amazing pieces that came out last year was, I think you know that LLMs, large language models, are now all the rage, right? So some smart person, some smart rear end, decided that they would train an LLM on IR theory. You know where we're going with this. So they trained a bot on IR theory works. Now, the vast majority of IR theory works are realist, aren't they? Then they stuck the bot in war game simulations. And they looked to see if the bot would choose in a crisis to fight or not. The bot chose war 100% of the time. I want you to let that sink in. The bot trained on IR theory chose war 100% of the time. That, I think, should put everybody on their back foot. That's saying something, isn't it? It's something very unfortunate. Okay? I also think many of you in this room, thank you very much, have read the First Political Order. Right? I believe that classic realpolitik is completely blind to almost all of the issues that we raised in the First Political Order. And yet I have a feeling that when you finished that book, you didn't say, Valerie Hudson must be an idealist, did you? I think you said, Valerie Hudson is a realist. But she's looking at things that classic realpolitik doesn't look at, right? And then, of course, I think there are other types of things that classic realism is blind to because we're locked into some of these straitjackets. You know, where is there room in the great game for what I call the Earth strike, parallel to the birth strike, which is a lowering of the carrying capacity of the Earth due to human activity? Where's that in the great game? Well, it isn't in the great game. And because it isn't in the great game, then you can't strategically absorb what you need to do. So I think there are these ways, right, that we can use these Echtpolitik lenses to see things in a realistic fashion that we're not seeing. Add them to what we already see and come up with better policies. Now you may ask yourself, well, no, not this crowd, but in a different audience, you may ask yourself, well, what do women know about security? I think it's possible that security studies has been so dominated by men for so long that we don't see the question as laughable. And it really is laughable. Some of you may recognize this graphic. Does anyone recognize this graphic? All right, a few of you do. This was actually went viral a few years ago. And the question asked was, what do you do regularly to prevent sexual assault? And the most common male response was, nothing. I don't think about it. The column on the right, and this is just a partial column, I couldn't even take a screenshot of the whole thing, was what women do. And I think many of the women in this room would tell you they do the same thing. All right? They check the back seat of the car before they get in it. They never use parking garages. They don't wear headphones outside for walking or jogging. They never rent first-floor apartments. They make sure friends know their itinerary and also have the name and contact information of any man they go on a date with. And they never put their drink down, ever. Right? I think I would argue, in a sense, that women, not because they have 2X chromosomes, but because they're moving through life as women, have very different security sensibilities and very different skill sets than men do. And that from one or two angles, we could say that women may actually be security experts in a way that men are not. That's a thought, isn't it? Because haven't we always thought that men are the experts on security? We have. But maybe women are too, right? Maybe women are too. So then the question becomes, well, you know, what do women know that's different? And what I'd like to say right here and now, you know, is I'm not saying that men don't know this stuff. And I'm not saying that there aren't some men who have actually researched these things in great detail, all right? So I do not believe men's brains are incapable of thinking of certain things. That's not what I'm saying at all. All I'm saying is that given how women move through this world, right, they are likely to see things, recognize things, right, that men may not immediately recognize as being an issue. And so the first one that I'd like to suggest is at least something I'm going to spend quite a bit of time in the book, is that power, remember the role of power in classic realpolitik, power without persistence is defeat. Power without persistence is defeat. So if I showed you some of these graphs here, this graph, of course, is projected population growth in China. This is Japan. Okay? There's something here. And there's something here that women absolutely know that men have only recently begun to see, is that we may be going after power in a way that defeats our ability to persist. And if that is truly the case, that power will mean nothing. Okay? I think that's one thing. And I'd like to riff on this a little bit. Persistence is not just physical survival. It's not just, population growth charts. But persistence has something deep to do with the survival, the transmission of knowledge of why your group should value its own persistence. Right? In fact, I'll never forget, it's about 10 years now, I attended a lecture that Condoleezza Rice gave. And you cannot accuse Condoleezza Rice of being an idealist. She is a consummate realist. Do you know what she identified as the most pressing national security threat to the United States of America? The poor quality of its public education system. Right? How do you persist as a group if knowledge about your group and why it is valuable and why it should keep existing has virtually disappeared? So I give you, of course, startling findings that I'm pretty sure do not startle you because you know them, all right? In a recent survey, and this is not just of young people, but also older people as well, only 47% of Americans could identify the 3 branches of American government. Asked to name the rights protected under the First Amendment, 64% knew freedom of speech was protected, but that's less than 2/3. 24%, only a quarter, knew the First Amendment protected freedom of religion. 20% knew it protected freedom of the press. 24% of respondents could not even name one thing protected by the First Amendment. We are doing an exceedingly poor job in terms of persistence, if we're talking about it not just in a physical sense, but also in a social sense. I do not want to tell you what percentage could find Ukraine on a map, because then you'd be really appalled. What else? What else would we talk about that women could add to an echt realpolitik? Well, I was thinking about threat response. And I think you know that most of us were trained in high school biology and told that human threat response is fight or flight, right? You've all heard that. But I'm willing to suggest to you that that threat response is not optimal because it is incomplete. Now, this is something that you may or may not know. The findings about fight or flight were based on studies that only used male animals, male monkeys, male mice, male rats, you name it. It was all male animals. And I would like to tongue-in-cheek suggest that this actually accords with, that fight or flight accords with patterns of American foreign intervention over the last 50 years. Right? Fight seems the go-to response, but at some point the Americans just resort to flight, don't they? I mean, I think people from Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan could, yeah, Lita's nodding. And I would like to suggest that this approach has yielded less than desirable outcomes, not just for the United States, but also for other countries as well. Well, at the turn of the century, someone finally examined the threat response of female animals. And they characterized it not as fight or flight, but as tend and befriend. Tend and befriend. Now, this is honed from women's experience walking through the world as women. Right? What is the single greatest threat to the physical security of women? Men. Right? Who do you want to meet in a forest? A bear or a man? 100% of women I know said bear. Absolutely. Of course. And a goodly proportion of men said, are you nuts? Right? And why they could not see that, I think, is another reveal, isn't it? Right? Another reveal. And so you can imagine that women's threat response of tend and befriend was honed in the crucible of experience with men. How do you get a raging man to not kill you? How do you get a raging man to not kill your kids? It's not fight or flight, because you're not strong enough to fight him, and you may not ever be able to flee him. Okay? I think women know something. So I think more specifically, befriend means to develop enough of a relationship with the source of the threat that the source will not seek your extinction. And I believe tend means to assure the safety of those under threat, that is others, right, that you're protecting, so they can survive the threat as well. Notice in tend and befriend the continuation of the theme of persistence. He may be screaming in my face with his fists raised, but I will survive, and my kids will survive. I'll make sure of it, right? Do you see that continuing theme of persistence? Notice also the element of what I'm calling failure of deterrence planning, okay? A lot of American foreign policy is based around deterrence, and we've had the might to deter many, many, many things. But I think women are more familiar with strategies where deterrence fails. And then what do you do, right? Then what do you do? And I think women have a real skill set in that. And I think as we enter a multipolar age, perhaps we can learn something from that skill set. Now, I do not believe that fight or flight and tend and befriend are opposing strategies. You have to choose one or you have to choose the other. All right? I don't believe that. But I believe American foreign policy, under realist thought, has treated them that way to our nation's detriment. And I think some will recognize this photo. Lita will recognize this photo. That's right, because you and your family were there. Okay? I believe that instead, we could think of combined strategies as perhaps better suited to what we're trying to do. How about our first line is fight and befriend? And what I mean by that is that, yes, we prepare to fight. Yes, we have a good military. Yes, we have power projection capabilities. Absolutely. But let us actively seek to turn our enemies into nations who are not our enemies, right? Even if they never wind up our friends, could they at least not seek our destruction? Can we do enough befriending to get to that point? And then secondly, I think another combination strategy that I'd like to look at is tend and flight, right? Which is, yes, flee if necessary, but ensure the safety of those who need protection from the effects of that flight. Tend and flight. All right, so I'd like to give you, another little piece of this here, which is, I told you that power without persistence is defeat, and I also believe that deterrence without deterrence failure planning is defeat. And that we have seen this all too often in the United States. And I believe Kabul 2021 is going to be a centerpiece of my book as a result, because I believe we dropped the ball on failure of deterrence planning. I do not believe that deterrence failure planning undermines deterrence, but I have evidence that that is exactly how the Biden administration thought of it. They viewed it as either or. Either we have a robust deterrence, or we plan for deterrence failure, because if we do both, then deterrence goes poof. And I think that's wrong-headed. And in fact, I'll just say very bluntly, ask any woman in an abusive relationship whether she believes deterrence failure planning undermines deterrence. No, the two always go hand in hand in her mind. I think also that success after deterrence has failed must not be defined solely in terms of restoring the status quo ante, right? I do not believe that victory is completely restoring the status quo before the deterrence failed, and that such a definition might actually make success less likely. I believe the concept of post-deterrence success must center persistence, whatever form that takes. Think about Dunkirk. When you think about Dunkirk, do you think about Dunkirk as the most ignominious episode of British military history? I don't think you do. I think most of us think of Dunkirk as an absolutely heroic effort to assure persistence, and that is how it's seen, and that is why the men who ferried the soldiers off the beach there in Calais were awarded medals for doing so. Right? This was a celebration of persistence, even though the fight approach failed. I believe also that escalation and the strategy of escalation dominance that is so common to offensive realism may also undercut persistence. And frankly, I think that's happening in Ukraine right now. I think the idea that escalation dominance is the only way for Ukraine to win is going to be a losing strategy for Ukraine. Let me give you a couple of examples. All right, the easy one is mutual assured destruction. As we know, mutual assured destruction rests upon balance of terror. And the classic scenarios, we have two individuals, each with a gun pointed at the other person's head with no shielding. Neither one should shoot, because if one shoots, they both shoot, they're both dead. Now, that was American nuclear strategy. I guess you could still argue it is American nuclear strategy. But I think it's important to remember that the Soviets argued that MAD was insane. In fact, those of you who are history buffs may remember that the big showdown came in 1967 in Glassboro, New Jersey, where the two sides met to discuss these issues. Here's a photo from that meeting. Can you tell by the back of his head who that man is? Does anyone know? It's Robert McNamara. That's exactly right. Absolutely right. Now, McNamara was the architect of MAD, as you know. And McNamara's assertion to the Soviets was offense is moral, defense is immoral. Right? That's MAD. Offense is moral, defense is immoral. With an emphasis actually in the SIOP, the Single Integrated Operations Plan, which governs nuclear use, as escalation dominance. Alexei Kosygin, speaking for the Soviets, argued the opposite. Defense is moral, offense is immoral. Now, let's be classic realists here for a moment and lay morality to one side. I want to ask you a question. Which of these approaches favors persistence? American or Soviet? Soviet. Soviet does. Which of these approaches bolsters failure of deterrence planning? American or Soviet? Soviet, isn't it? MAD, from the point of view I'm trying to discuss today, MAD is defeat. MAS, mutual assured survival, is victory, with, of course, befriend efforts. So I'm going to tell you that Ronald Reagan got it right. Right? He got it right. Let me give you a second example. Taiwan. Let me give you a few background facts. 58% of Americans oppose sending U.S. troops to fight in Taiwan if Taiwan is invaded by China. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken has asserted our commitment to Taiwan is rock solid. The pundits say if China launches a military or paramilitary action against Taiwan and the United States does not respond, the U.S. needs to understand that at that point, its general strategic credibility across Asia would evaporate. Do you feel the trap? Do you feel the straitjacket? You better feel it, right? All right, well, I want to suggest to you that this is exactly the tragedy of great power politics. And that's because it's based on incomplete realism. So, with incomplete realism, we process the situation as, quote, we must make deterrence hold. It's our only hope. But frankly, all of us know here that stance is increasingly incredible. Now, while we would never abandon deterrence efforts, absolutely, deterrence efforts, we're going to do them. All right? We need robust failure of deterrence planning centered on persistence now, before the conflict begins. And we must not fall into the incomplete realist temptation of believing that such planning will undercut our deterrence efforts. What I think, ladies and gentlemen, is that this is a situation ripe for tend and flight response. Let me suggest what that might look like. Sure, by all means invest in deterrence. Talk tough to the future perpetrator. Arm the intended victim. But there must also be strong contingency planning, probably secret, for tend and flight for Taiwan as Plan B. A good percentage of the 24 million people in Taiwan will want to leave rather than live under Chinese Communist Party rule. Have Taiwan's diplomatic allies been canvassed to determine how many Taiwanese each nation will take? Has the U.S. Department of Defense, in concert with regional friends, prepared extraordinary means of mass transport to make this possible? Have Taiwan's friends developed an assimilation plan, complete with funding for housing, healthcare, and education, as well as regulations allowing for transference of credentials and access to work permits? Has Taiwan itself an emergency fund to facilitate such planning? Has the Taiwan government plans to spirit out of the country important historical documents or objects that would otherwise be destroyed? Has the government made plans to ensure financial continuity for their nation if an escape were necessary? For example, during the lead up to World War II, several European monarchies shipped off all their gold to England. What is the 21st century equivalent of that? Will China have to pre-rig its global semiconductor industry to self-destruct? Are there plans to ensure the symbolic leaders, such as the president himself, will be able to leave and reestablish a voice for Taiwan? Are there types of military equipment or strikes that would allow for safer transport of those who wish to leave without escalating to direct war with China? Can any movement of people and materiel start to be accomplished now without fanfare? For example, are there special measures that could be taken with regard to the future of the Taiwanese, that is, their children and young people? Do we have a scholarship program that would invite them over? We didn't for Afghan women, and we should have had that. We assert a successful escape for the people of Taiwan will be vital in shaping a new international order in the world. That is, in addition to providing greater human security, post-deterrence or failure of deterrence, tend and flight could offer strategic advantage by vitiating the success of the aggressor. Consider Dunkirk once more. Though certainly Dunkirk resulted from British weakness and successful German aggression, the sheer audacity of the successful evacuation operation became a point of pride for the British people and became a beacon of hope to all those whom the Nazi regime attempted to crush. The Dunkirk escape certainly did not redound to either the glory or the power of the Nazis, for it was a potent symbol that resistance was not futile, that persistence was power, and that all persons of goodwill could stand together and hope to outmaneuver a powerful nation that threatened them. Escape must be married with punishment as well, which should be strategized now and not after the fact. Plan B must include non-physical means of hurting the perpetrator where it really counts, not as a mean of deterring the attack, for domestic violence perpetrators, to use an analogy, are often undeterrable, but as a means of real punishment for the crime. After the enormity of an attack on Taiwan, would a far more robust collective security treaty and organization in Asia become a real possibility? Would a radical divestiture of foreign investment and operations in China be a possible boycott, divest, sanctions approach for China, BDS approach, that would nullify the One Belt, One Road initiative? Would nations refuse to continue to train Chinese researchers, hampering Chinese technological progress? In other words, there are many, many, many things that we could be doing now for failure of defense planning that would not undercut deterrence, but would make it more robust. Remember, persistence is power. All right, so I think if we're successful, the era that follows will showcase the limit of China's physical power to get what it wants. It will highlight China's lack of impunity. It will be an era of adroit balancing on dimensions besides physical prowess, instead of an era of predominance and decline gauged by military might alone. I think this would be a far better strategic outcome for the U.S. alliance and get us out of that straitjacket we are currently in. So while a fuller realpolitik is still in its infancy, consider that this discussion may be a springboard for WPS 2.0. We've made some headway on 1325 goals: women's participation, protection, prevention of harm to women. But maybe WPS 2.0 is a farther shore, where we ask what women might know about security that men might not easily know, and how what women know might offer a complementary yet critically important perspective on matters such as core national interest, grand strategy, jus ex bello, the efficacy of deterrence, and many other concepts. In other words, send me your thoughts, and I'll let you know when the book comes out. And I apologize, it looks to me like I'm a little bit over time. Rather than take questions, because we are almost out of time, I'd like to choose 2 students to come up and tell us in just a couple minutes what they learned, and then we'll all say adieu. So I'd like to call on Donovan Decker and Andrea Lee.
Is it on? Yeah. Okay. Hi, I'm Andrea Lee. I'm a first-year senior at the United States Air Force Academy. I just wanted to thank you for inviting us, Dr. Hudson, and for having us and hosting my classmate, Cammie, and my 2 professors, Dr. Metcalf and Dr. DeAngelis. So, kind of nervous. But some things that I wanted to echo were the vulnerability of women and the 3 ladies that came up here and presented. That was amazing to see. That's something we don't often see at school with our research and some of our classes. as we're still kind of lacking in the women's peace and security aspect. So my first introduction, or like my first real practice with women's peace and security, was writing a literature review about 2 weeks ago, where I studied the effect of women's effect on infrastructure in Ukraine, and that was just kind of my segue into this, so I apologize, I'm a little new. But I also wanted to touch on Dr. Lee's highlights of the importance of the small details that affect women in service-like structures. So the lighting, the reporting services, and many of these aspects relate to something that I'm gonna see very soon in my career. So I recently dropped force support, which is a personnelist job. So a lot of cadets at the academy often hear about the operational aspect and the application. Being a cadet, you haven't had any of that application or operational experience. So it's really eye-opening for me to see something that's so close to my career field affect women's peace and security, and that being force support. Being the job that I dropped, it's very important for me to see how soon I can apply these aspects of lighting, the small details and stuff like that to my career as an upcoming lieutenant. Something I also wanted to echo was the Operations Allies Welcome project, and how women didn't have access to a lot of the things that men had access to, which would be like resources or the phone. And I think that's something that's really crazy to think about, because like in the slides, we were talking about how our First Amendment rights, a lot of people didn't know, and a lot of people didn't realize that those were our First Amendment rights. And so something that's crazy for me to realize is that they didn't have that access to freedom of speech by having that phone. And I know that's something so simple, but it was really eye-opening. And a small detail I just wanted to echo that I saw that was really important to me was that females do move differently, and that's something I've experienced like firsthand. Only being 21 years old, I've already experienced that, you know, I have to be louder, I have to be more confident, I have to be direct just to be heard and just to be listened to. And that's something that's very frightening as a young girl, soon to be lieutenant, because how am I gonna move in my future? How am I gonna move so that I'm listened to as a commander, or I'm respected, or I am taken just as seriously? And that's something that I just wanted to leave with y'all, because if you have any advice, please come help me. But thank you again for having us, and we're so excited to see where this goes in the future. Thank you.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Donovan Decker. I'm a second-year MIA student here at the Bush School. I'm studying grand strategy, defense policy, intelligence as an instrument of statecraft, and analytical methods. You'll have to bear with me. I have some notes here that I started to scratch down upon my ambiguous receipt of mission from Dr. Hudson. So I think the biggest takeaway I will have is operationalization that a lot of you touched on. Each presentation today sort of showcased how you've all sought to take specific aspects of the tenets of women, peace, and security and apply them within your respective fields. And I think that's really what I'm going to take away from this, is how I can use your insights and findings at my very tactical level in both my professional life and in research here at school. So for example, I'm in the Minnesota National Guard, so that our primary mission is serving our state and community, so that Defense Civil Supportive Authority's gendered perspective is going to be absolutely critical in all of our operations. And within the National Guard, I also do military intelligence, so that gendered perspective on PMISI A-scope, which we use all the time in military intelligence, is fascinating, because I'm often left wondering how I can implement these gendered perspectives within existing frameworks in the intelligence community, and that is a perfect example. So I really appreciated that. But also within my research here at the Bush School, I do irregular warfare research, so that also fit in there as well, but I'm mainly focused on Russia and its strategic actions. So the women's stats coders coming up here and showing us how gendered perspectives can impact strategic conflict was absolutely fascinating. So I'm definitely going to be taking that forward with my research. But I think one thing that really is underscored through all this is I'm at a very tactical level. A lot of you guys are working at a strategic level, but those gendered perspectives are reaching every single spot. So it just really goes to show how ubiquitous and important these gendered issues are. So I just want to say thank you again all for coming. This was a fantastic event. I really appreciate it.
wonderful day. Did you feel the energy in the room? Wasn't that great? Oh, I just loved it. I know that my batteries are energized from being here, and I'm grateful to all of you who made the trek. I know for some of you, you trekked a long way to get here, and we are really grateful that you did. I'm also grateful to all of the wonderful students who came. I'm grateful to the Borlaug Fellows and Professor Morano for being here today. And give yourself a round of applause. We did it.